Okay, so the topic I'm going to discuss is actually a little bit more specific than that one. It's property law in space. I want to talk about kind of two different groups of people who sort of have the opposite problem. Okay. Hold the mic closer to your mouth. Thank you. Feel free to shout out tips like that, especially if you've been drinking as much as she has. Okay. Okay, let me start with this one. Show of hands, who used the sun today? Anybody? You in the back? You didn't? Okay, that's fine. Some people won't raise their hands for anything. Okay, if you used the sun, let me guess, you probably didn't pay anything for it, right? If you didn't, this is who you have to thank for that. Okay, and this is Maria Angeles Duran, La Dueña del Sol, the woman who owns the sun. Now you're probably asking, how does she get to own the sun? Well, here's how she did it. All right, she heard that there was a thing called the Outer Space Treaty, which governs what it says, and we'll talk more about this. It says that nations can't own the moon or anything in space. But she also heard that it did not apply to individuals. It's an agreement between countries. So this gave her an idea. And she wrote up a deed, and that's what she's got there, and she went into town, and she had it notarized. And that's why she owns the sun. Now, you're probably pissed that you didn't think of it first. But it's too late. She already has the deed. Now, she got the idea from this guy whose name is Dennis Hope. And for about 30 years, he's run a thing called the Lunar Embassy. And you can see him here with a map of his moon. And the red areas are where he sold plots of this. He sells plots to people. The value varies. It's usually about $25. And if you do that, you will get an actual lunar deed like this. This is the kind you get in England. But it says that you have lawfully purchased a 1 acre or 5 acre plot, depending on how much you paid. And then it's all legal, and you've got this document to prove it. And he's been doing this since about 1980. And there are some estimates that he's probably made several $1 million from doing it. Now, maybe he's joking, maybe he's not joking, but he's made a lot of money from doing it. Anyway, his legal argument is exactly the same as Mrs. Duran's. The Outer Space Treaty doesn't apply to people. And so what he did actually is write up a claim, and he sent a letter to the United Nations to tell them that he was claiming the moon. And when he didn't hear back, and here, so you can go there right now, and as you can see, he's branched out quite a bit. Not only can you buy the moon, you can get land on Mars, Mercury. Is it Io or Eo? Eo, thank you. On Eo, if you want to, I have no idea, but you could buy plots on this Venus. So he branched out from the moon to other planets, all on the same legal theory. And this is my favorite. If you got $250,000, he'll sell you Pluto, the whole thing. And this is, I like this a lot. He's got one in stock. Act now. Okay, now, he's not the only guy to do this either, specifically with the moon. This is just one other example. This is an outfit called the Lunar Registry. And you may not be able to read that, but you can see all of these groups they've got a page somewhere on their website that is devoted to whether this is legal or not. And here, what their argument here is, they're talking about the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, and they give the full title there. They say it's more commonly known as the 1967 Moon Treaty. And then down at the bottom, they say later on the UN expanded on this with its Moon Agreement that all UN states have adopted, and then it was ratified into law in the 1980s, and that's the legal framework today. None of that is true. There is a Moon Agreement, but almost nobody has signed it. It's certainly not binding international law. There is a 1967 Outer Space Treaty, and this was entered into, obviously, a couple years before we landed on the moon. It was not clear at the time who was going to be first, and so both the Soviet Union and the U.S., I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but this is basically what it says. So the articles, both the major space powers had an interest in setting out some rules so that whoever was first wouldn't claim the whole thing. And so these are just, I'll come back to a couple of these, but this is sort of a summary of what it says. Space for all mankind. Nations cannot appropriate things for themselves. No stealing spaceships is the paraphrase of the principle that if you launch something into space, if a country launches something into space, you have jurisdiction over what happens in that spaceship. And you're supposed to return spaceships to others. So this is basically what it says, and it lays out some general ground rules. Okay, and obviously the countries in red still matter. They just don't matter really to space travel. So almost all countries have signed the Outer Space Treaty. There is a Moon Agreement that virtually nobody has signed, so I'm not going to talk about that. Okay, so there is this treaty out there that applies to, that was agreed to between the space powers, and almost every other country in the world has signed it. And it has those provisions about sort of hands-off celestial bodies, right? So here's the thought process of Mr. On and Dennis Hope and everybody else who is selling deeds to outer space property. The Outer Space Treaty does not apply to me. Debatable. Premise, and therefore conclusion, I can point at things in the sky and say that I own them. I don't want to get, I deliberately am trying not to get too technical in legal terms here, but we do have a term for that that we use in the profession. It's complete bullshit. This is a term that you will want to, really comes in handy these days, so you'll want to remember it. Tell them a lawyer told you to use it. Okay, so set aside this treaty. Let's say it doesn't apply to them. You don't just get to point at things and say that you own them. Okay, how do you get a property right in something? Does anybody here own something? Anybody? You? What do you own? You what? A house? You own a house. How'd you get it? You bought it. How'd they get it? You have no idea. Are you sure you own it? Okay. So you could buy something. What's another way you could get a property right in something? And you could inherit it. Yeah, that's true. Anything else? You could adverse possess it. There aren't supposed to be other lawyers here tonight, but okay. Anything else? You could lie. Is that you could lie? You could buy it, right? Okay. Okay. There's several different ways. You came up with some of them. I just happened to find this picture today. I like this a lot because it's true either way, right? Okay, so you might own something because the thing is you. This is sort of, we're going back to John Locke, sort of original principles here. Most of us would agree that we own our own bodies. Some people don't agree with that, but that's generally agreed. Or you made it. And this is part of John Locke's theory of labor, basically saying, we agree we own ourselves, we own our labor. If you mix your labor with something, and he's typically thinking about agriculture, you own not just what you create, but also the land, because you've mixed your labor with it. Okay? It doesn't really work for fishermen, but that's the theory. You bought it. Nobody yelled this one out, I'm glad. But you killed the previous owner and took it. The right of conquest is well established, unfortunately, in history. There's actually a Supreme Court decision from the 1820s, I think, that had to do with this. Basically, it was avoided the question, as you can expect. But that's one way to get it. You found it, right of discovery. But the most important one is you're on it. You possess it, or you occupy it. So, think about it this way. And again, we're trying to go back to first principles here. If there are no laws, if this treaty or whatever doesn't apply, where does it come from? So let's say you're floating around in the Pacific and you come across this island. It looks nice. You decide you'd like to live there. So you move. You do whatever you do. You live on it for a while. One day you go swimming. Okay. Then you come back and there's somebody on your island. So now maybe you can agree to share it. More likely, knowing people, he's going to say, "Don't even get out of the water because no trespassing." And you're going to say, "What? I was here first." That's what you say, and it's a very fundamental principle of where property rights come from. You might have heard possession is 9/10 of the law. It's just very fundamental that you were there first and you're there at the time, or you can prove you were there first. You have a property right that other people will recognize. And I don't know if in the sources that they asked us to put together for these things, I put in an article on evolutionary theory and the origin of property rights. And it's I'm oversimplifying it, but basically it says that the same kind of thing happens in nature, that biologists will say that the rule in nature is the resident, if there's a territorial dispute, the resident always wins. And evolutionary theorists have worked this out, and basically it comes down to if you say you have a population that's you've got hawks that are very aggressive about seeking out territory, and you've got doves that don't want to fight at all. You don't end up with a population that's all hawks. You end up with a kind of hybrid population in between, where animals are they tend to defend or protect what they have, but they tend to then respect what their neighbors have, and it has to do with the risk of being injured in a fight not being worth the gains, as long as there's, relatively speaking, there's enough to go around. So this sort of territorial property rights issue is, you even see it in the animal kingdom, and that article is interesting if you were interested in the topic, because it talks about how this might have happened with with early humans, or in a situation where there are no laws, the first people to a location. So it may be that fundamental just to say, I was here first, okay? Which is why it's so dumb to claim that you could own the sun, all right? You can't, now hopefully somebody's going to say, you could go at night, but you can't go to the sun. That was too obvious a joke to tell. You can't go to the sun. You can't fence off pieces of it. You can't exclude other people from it. It just makes no sense for La Dueña del Sol to say that she owns the sun. Now, she actually, she is modeling her thing here after Dennis Hope and the Lunar Embassy. And she actually was trying to sell plots of land on the sun on eBay. This is just last year. eBay kicked her off because they said they have a policy against selling intangible rights, I guess. So they kicked her off. Last I heard, she was challenging that in a Spanish court. So she's really going to the mat on this stuff. She's a complete lunatic. It just makes no sense here. So it makes, but it does make some sense in the context of asteroid mining or traveling to other places, because you could, I mean, assuming you could overcome the technical problems, you could actually go there and sort of plant your flag. You can occupy it, you can do things with it, stake your claim. And so it's not crazy in this sense. Now, they're a long way from doing it, but it's not crazy. They actually have kind of the opposite problem. It's because it's clear that if they could get to this property, stake their claim, they might have a claim that other people would recognize, just based on kind of common law principles. The issue that they've got, though, is concerns about whether the Outer Space Treaty, in fact, applies to them. So that's what the rest of this is about, kind of the opposite problem. I apologize for the legal text here, but we have to do some of it. This is the first article of the Outer Space Treaty I was talking about before, and you can see it says the exploration and use of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, that's how it's defined, shall be for everybody. Free for exploration and use by all states. So it's a pretty general statement, but that's the very first article. The second one is the most important one. It says outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies. They say that every single time. I've spared you that. Is not subject to national appropriation, by sovereignty, by using it, by occupation, any of the means that we talked about, off limits. And then there is an article further down that talks about how states, it recognizes the fact that there will be national activities by governments or by non-governmental entities, and that states have responsibilities for what their nationals do. And states have to ensure that national activities are carried out in conformity with the treaty. Okay? So, if you work for deep space injuries, sorry, I'm a tort lawyer sometimes, deep space industries or planetary resources, or I think there's one other group that is actually investing money into developing space mining technologies, and you are one of their lawyers, here are some of the arguments that you make. One, I'm talking about asteroids now. These aren't celestial bodies. Remember, outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies. Well, I'll be honest. I think this is kind of a dumb argument, right? What are celestial bodies? Well, the moon is, obviously. Other moons, planets. So, probably suns. Not that it matters. But so why would asteroids not be? The point is the treaty was trying to define the uses of outer space, but nobody gives a shit about outer space. They care about the stuff in it, right? And asteroids are in it. So I don't think that this argument works. Now, a little bit better argument is, screw the treaty. My country said I can do this. All right. That's a possibility. We'll come back to that. They will also say this isn't appropriation. Remember, the treaty talks about no national appropriation of these bodies. And they'll say, well, I'm not appropriating anything. I just want to get the good stuff out of it. I just want to dig into it. To me, this is sort of like saying, like, you wake up in the middle of the night and I'm out digging in your yard, and I say, don't worry, I'm not threatening your property. I'm just doing some digging. I mean, that's probably not going to make you feel too comfortable. And you also get to the point of, well, what if you've dug out the whole thing and you've hollowed it out? You've basically appropriated it. So that's a little dicey. And then they'll also say, all right, well, it's not national appropriation, which is basically the same argument that Dennis Hope is making. I'm not a nation, and so the treaty doesn't apply to me. All right, on the topic of U.S. law, there's really not very much of this here, but the United States did pass a statute at the end of 2015, sponsored by, of all people, Ted Cruz, the U.S. Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act. And the first part of this is totally boring and has to do with like insurance and things like that. But at the very end, they stuck in a provision that it used to be called the Asteroids Act. They like to have these cool acronyms. Now it's got a crappy acronym, but they stuck it in there at the end. And this is basically what it says. A United States citizen shall be entitled to any asteroid resource. You can possess it, own it, transport it, use it, do whatever you want with it. Have fun, as long as it's obtained in accordance with applicable law, including the international obligations of the United States. So, all right, wait a minute. If the United States can't appropriate it for itself, how can it tell its citizens to go and do that? It doesn't seem to be consistent with the international obligations of the United States. How would we feel if Russia or China were doing that? Probably not great. Maybe we're fine with Russia doing it now, but all right. And they also included, this isn't in the statute, but they put this in the act. Congress likes to do this. They'll stick in this stuff about what they understand the law to mean. It is the sense of Congress that by passing this, the United States is not asserting sovereignty or sovereign or exclusive rights over any celestial body. Well, okay, yeah, I'm not sure if they're very clear on this, but you're either violating the law or you're not. You don't get to violate it and then say you're not violating it, even if you're Congress. So this is all, it's very up in the air. What does this mean? And this was sponsored by, in part, by the industries, because one of the things that they want is certainty in this area because they want people to invest, right? Well, this just doesn't do that. Passing a law that says, go get asteroids and, we'll worry about it later doesn't really settle the question. But the U.S. here is disclaiming any intent to take over things in outer space. Okay, so, will other countries be comfortable with that? I don't know. And the example that I want to use is a strange old law called the Guano Islands Act of 1856. And this is laws still on the books today, actually. It was passed at a time when there was no artificial fertilizer. So the best source of fertilizer at the time was bird shit, guano, right? Seabirds have lived on these islands for like a million years, and wow, the stuff they left behind is great fertilizer. So at the time, the United States wanted to encourage people to go and mine this vital resource. So they passed a law saying if you, United States citizen, find one of these islands, go for it. And as I don't know if you can read down here, it says, if you find this and you exploit it, those islands shall be considered as appertaining to the United States. What does that mean? No one knows. No one knew at the time. No one knows now. Appertain. Can we claim it? Because here's something is interesting to remember. The Constitution talks about states and it talks about territories, which we had at the time. Okay, there is no provision in the Constitution for getting new territories, let alone for claiming these islands that are out there. There's just no authorization in the Constitution for it. The Louisiana Purchase, which you've probably heard of, totally illegal. Jefferson, in fact, President Jefferson, he drafted a constitutional amendment that he was going to propose that would have given the country the power to do this kind of thing, to expand that way. And then he thought about it and he decided, maybe we shouldn't offer that. And he just kind of stuck it in a drawer and did it anyway. So that's how the Louisiana Purchase happened. But so appertaining to the United States, nobody knows what it means. Oh, yeah. I found this guano. It was a big deal at the time. I just thought that was funny. And this is to show, still on the books today, the Guano Islands Act. There was a case involving a guano island as recently as 1997. And the issues surrounding jurisdiction over these islands, and we still claim territories around the world that we originally claimed under this Guano Islands Act, of all things. Because what happens when you say your citizens can go and exploit territories and things like that, things happen. People, crimes are committed. There was a murder committed on one of these islands in the Caribbean, and that the issue of jurisdiction over that island went up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And that, hard as it may be to believe, there's a series of cases about that are the whole legal basis for why the United States has these, basically this kind of semi-empire around the world. All comes from this Guano Islands Act. So the point is that the U.S. has kind of done this again, right? We've passed this sort of odd statute that's sort of vague. We sort of deputize citizens to go out and do this, and but other countries probably are not going to be too comforted by the statements in the law saying that we're not claiming these things because also in the law authorizes the president to use armed forces to defend these things if necessary. It's not necessary now, but it was then. So. This is just an example of how those kind of unusual, vague statements in the law can turn into something that really matters. Now, don't get me wrong. I think we should get involved in asteroid mining. I think we should learn to. We should develop the technology to go and mine these things and go and divert them if we need to. Okay, it's important to do that. I just think it's not entirely clear. That we have a legal right to do this now. So, to sum up, here's what we've learned. Using the sun is still free. It's good to know. She was planning to charge corporations, but she said there would be an exception for individual people, so you guys are covered. If you buy a moon or a planet from somebody, all you're getting is a piece of paper. Dennis Hope and Ms. Duran do not have any rights that they could sell you. The U.S. might be violating the Outer Space Treaty. We need a new treaty. We can withdraw from it if we want to, but we should renegotiate it. Go get an asteroid if you can do it. I don't want to discourage you from that. Just be sure that you can defend it if somebody else also wants it. Okay? All right. Thanks. This is my book, my firm, my blogs, loweringthebar.net. Please check it out. And I did once represent a guy who owned a moon rock, so I have at least that much experience in the area. Okay? Thanks very much.